The silence of the convent was broken only by the distant sound of the wind brushing against its ancient walls. Sister Elena, a gentle woman with a thoughtful gaze, was in the convent library. Her days were filled with prayer, work, and study, but that day, something unusual caught her attention. While dusting a forgotten shelf, her eyes fell on a small USB drive, hidden between two old books. It was covered in dust, yet something about it seemed to demand discovery. 3 embossed letters stood out on its surface, BTC. Elena picked up the drive, turning it over in her fingers with curiosity. She wasn't exactly tech-savvy, but there was something intriguing about the simplicity of those letters. BTC, she murmured softly. What could it mean? She knew she wouldn't find peace until she uncovered its contents. She hurried to the convent's small computer, an old laptop used for accounting and essential communication. She plugged in the USB drive and waited with anticipation. When the screen lit up, a single folder with a mysterious icon appeared. Sister Elena double-clicked on it, but instead of opening, a cryptic screen popped up with a message. Warning, one more error and the device will lock permanently. Elena's heart raced. She had no idea what to do, but she was certain the drive held something important. She decided to ask for help from her fellow nuns, but none of them knew anything about technology. You should leave it alone, Sister Agnes, the eldest nun, advised her. Not everything hidden needs to be uncovered. But for Elena, giving up wasn't an option. She felt a pull, a sense of urgency she couldn't ignore. Then, a spark of memory flashed in her mind, Marco. Years before taking her vows, Elena had been in a relationship with Marco, a brilliant but rebellious hacker. He was a charming man with a sharp mind and a smile that could persuade anyone to follow him. But Marco lived on the edge of legality, and his world of codes and secrets had eventually driven them apart. Even though years had passed, Elena knew Marco was the only person who could help her. She decided to find him, aware that reopening that chapter of her past might bring new temptations. After some searching, Elena discovered that Marco still worked in cybersecurity, though his lifestyle hadn't changed much. When she contacted him, his response was a mix of surprise and sarcasm. Sister Elena, he said over the phone, his voice full of disbelief. I can't believe you're a nun. I can't wait to see you. Elena immediately felt uneasy. Marco hadn't changed, and his cocky attitude reminded her exactly why she had chosen to leave him. Nevertheless, she knew his help was essential. She agreed to meet him in a small apartment in the city, far from the convent. When Marco opened the door, his cocky smile and sharp gaze were unmistakable. Elena, he said, studying her with amused eyes. Or should I say Sister Elena? You're even more beautiful than I remember. Elena ignored his remarks and held out the USB drive. I need your help, she said, keeping her tone professional. She explained the encrypted screen and the threatening message. Marco looked intrigued. He took the drive and examined it carefully. BTC, he murmured. You know what that means, right? I have no idea, Elena replied. Marco smirked. Bitcoin. This drive could hold a fortune. Elena was speechless. Bitcoin. She'd heard of cryptocurrencies but never imagined that such a small drive could be worth so much. With his usual bold attitude, Marco added, I'll help you. But there's one condition, if I manage to unlock it, I want you to spend one night with me. Like old times. Elena felt her blood boil. Don't you dare, she snapped coldly. I'm not here to play your games. Marco raised his hands in mock surrender, though the smile on his face didn't fade. All right. Just kidding. But this drive, it's risky. If I mess up, the contents will be gone forever. Elena thought for a long moment. Then, with a firm voice, she said, Fine. But let me be clear, tonight won't be what you imagine. Help me unlock it, and we'll see what's inside. Marco accepted the challenge, and the two got to work. For hours, the room was silent except for the tapping of the keyboard and Marco's frustrated sighs. Elena watched him closely, noticing the same determination she had always admired in him. Finally, a distinct sound indicated that the system had been unlocked. A cryptic message appeared on the screen. To whoever finds this drive, I leave part of my fortune. Use it better than I did. Below the message was a digital wallet address. When they opened it, both were left speechless. The equivalent of 1 billion Bitcoin flashed on the screen. Elena and Marco exchanged a look. That moment was going to change everything. The room was engulfed in an eerie silence as Marco and Sister Elena stared at the screen. The flashing number before their eyes seemed unreal, 1 billion Bitcoin, an unimaginable fortune, contained in a USB drive stumbled upon in an old library. This can't be real, Marco murmured, his breath shaky. This is a treasure. The biggest fortune I've ever seen. Do you understand what this means? Elena didn't respond right away. Her gaze remained fixed on the screen, but her mind was flooded with thoughts and questions. It was as if a wave of possibilities, doubts, and fears had swept over her all at once. It's not ours, she finally said firmly. We can't keep it. This money, or whatever it is, doesn't belong to us. Marco let out a nervous laugh, shaking his head. It doesn't belong to anyone, Elena. It's anonymous, nameless. That's the beauty of cryptocurrencies, no one can trace them. Whoever left this message gave up their fortune. Now, it's up to us to decide what to do with it. Elena turned to Marco, her expression serious. And what would you do with it? She asked, crossing her arms. Marco hesitated for a moment before his cocky smile returned. Me? I'd invest it. Buy more cryptocurrencies, grow it. With a capital like this, I could multiply it. It'd be like building a digital empire. And you could do the same. We could change our lives forever. Marco's words were filled with enthusiasm, but Elena couldn't share his excitement. Change our lives? At what cost, Marco? This money wasn't left to be squandered. It was left to do good. Marco raised an eyebrow, studying her intently. Do good? And how exactly do you plan to do that? Build hospitals? Donate it to some charity? Do you know what happens to that kind of money? It gets lost in bureaucracy. It disappears. This is an opportunity, Elena. It doesn't come twice in a lifetime. Elena let out a deep sigh. She knew Marco was partly right. That money was an enormous responsibility, and any decision they made would have consequences. But she couldn't ignore what she felt deep in her heart. This isn't an opportunity for us, Marco, she said calmly. It's a test. A temptation. God is giving us a chance to do something right, something that goes beyond our personal desires. We can't waste this opportunity on selfishness. Elena's words struck Marco more deeply than he wanted to admit. For years, he had lived chasing easy profits, bending rules, and crossing moral lines. But now, standing before her, he felt exposed, as if all his past choices were being called into question. And what if we're wrong? Marco finally asked, his tone more serious. What if we think we're doing good but end up causing more harm? This money is dangerous, Elena. It could change us in ways we can't imagine. Elena looked at him with steady but compassionate eyes. It's not the money that's dangerous, Marco. It's our intentions. We need to be guided by love, not fear. For hours, the two continued to debate, weighing possibilities and risks. Despite his initial reluctance, Marco began to entertain the idea of using the funds for something greater. It was a thought he would never have considered before, but something in Elena's words was shifting his perspective. In the end, they decided to act, but not alone. Marco used his expertise as a hacker to ensure anonymity, creating a web of transactions that would make it impossible for anyone to trace the money. Meanwhile, Elena secretly reached out to a few trusted charitable organizations, explaining that an anonymous donor wanted to fund the construction of schools, hospitals, and shelters for the homeless. "They'll never know it was us," Marco said as he typed furiously on his keyboard. "It doesn't matter," Elena replied. "We're not doing this for recognition. We're doing what's right." As the night progressed, the two worked side by side, each bringing their unique strengths. Marco, with his technical skills, carefully traced the path of the money, ensuring every transaction was secure. Elena, with her faith and determination, coordinated the details, identifying the right projects to maximize the impact of the funds. At one point, Marco paused and looked at Elena. "You know," he said with a faint smile, "I never thought we'd work together again. And I definitely never thought you'd change the way I see the world." Elena smiled back but didn't respond. There was no need for words. When the sun rose, the USB drive was empty. The money, transferred and distributed, had found its way to those who needed it most. Marco and Elena sat in silence, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "And now?" Marco asked, his voice tinged with a subtle melancholy. "Now we go back to our lives," Elena replied. "But remember this moment, Marco. Because what we've done isn't about us, it's about the people we'll help." Their work was done, but the meaning of that night would stay with them forever. The empty USB drive lay on the table, a silent symbol of what Marco and Elena had accomplished. For hours, they had worked tirelessly, driven by a mix of adrenaline, determination, and an odd sense of peace. Now, as the sun slowly rose through the windows of Marco's apartment, the weight of their actions began to settle. Elena stood up, stretching slightly after the long night. Her eyes fell on Marco, who was still staring at the computer screen, as if he couldn't tear himself away from what they had just done. "We did it," Marco said softly, almost as if speaking louder might break the magic of the moment. "We really moved 1 billion Bitcoin. No one will ever know it was us." Elena approached him and placed a hand on his shoulder. "It doesn't matter who knows. What matters is what those actions will do for those in need. We turned a temptation into a blessing. That's what counts." Marco turned to look at her, and for a moment, his usual cocky smile vanished, replaced by a more serious expression. "You know, Elena, my whole life I thought money was everything. I lived chasing the next big score, the next easy gain. But tonight made me realize there's more." Elena smiled gently. "It's never too late to find your purpose, Marco. God always gives us another chance, if we're ready to take it." Her words seemed to sink deeply into Marco, who stood up from his chair and began pacing the room nervously. "And now?" he asked, uncertainty in his voice. "Do I just go back to my old life? Pretend tonight never happened?" Elena looked at him intently. "This night will always exist, Marco. We can't change the past, but we can choose what to do with the future. It's up to you to decide what kind of man you want to be." After a moment of silence, Marco nodded slowly. "I can't go back," he finally said. "Not after all this. I want to do something different, something good. Maybe I can use my skills to help people instead of exploiting them." Elena smiled, satisfied with his answer. "It's a good start," she said. "And remember, Marco, change doesn't happen all at once. It's a journey, and there will be obstacles. But if you stay true to what you've learned tonight, you'll find your way." The two spent the rest of the morning discussing the details of what they had done. Marco, with his analytical nature, wanted to ensure every transaction was secure and irreversible. Elena, on the other hand, spoke about the organizations that had received the funds, imagining the faces of the people who would be helped. When it was time to part, the silence between them was heavy with emotion. Marco walked Elena to the door, his face serious but peaceful. "Thank you, Elena," he said sincerely. Not just for giving me this opportunity, but for reminding me of who I can be." Elena smiled one last time before stepping outside, leaving Marco standing in the doorway, watching as she walked away. For both of them, that night had left an indelible mark, a reminder that even the smallest choices could create ripples that changed the world. Elena smiled at him, her eyes full of compassion. "Thank you, Marco, for listening to your heart." Back at the convent, Sister Elena immersed herself in prayer. She felt that night had been more than an extraordinary experience, it had been a test of her faith. She had faced temptations, doubts, and even a tie to her past, but she had emerged stronger. Her fellow sisters noticed her transformation. There was a new light in her eyes, a serenity that seemed to go beyond understanding. When Sister Agnes asked her what had happened, Elena simply replied, "God always gives us a path, even in the darkest moments. And when we follow that path, we can create miracles." For Marco, life took an unexpected turn. He decided to leave the world of illegal hacking behind and dedicate himself to cybersecurity, helping companies protect themselves from cyber attacks. He used his skills for good, finding a new purpose in life. Occasionally, he thought back to that night with Elena. It wasn't just the money that made it special but the transformation it had brought within him. He had found a new definition of wealth, one that wasn't measured in Bitcoin or bank accounts but in what he could do for others. A year later, Marco received an anonymous letter. It contained only a few words, but the message was clear. "Thank you for finding your path. Keep going." Marco smiled, knowing it was from Elena. There was no need for a signature or details. Their bond transcended words, an invisible thread that would always connect them. In the convent courtyard, Elena walked in silence, gazing at the blue sky above her. She reflected on everything that had happened, the weight of choices and the beauty of redemption. God places temptations before us, she thought, but He also gives us the strength to overcome them. And when we choose to do good, we turn trials into miracles. With a serene smile, she looked up at the sky, knowing that the journey of that night had changed not just her and Marco, but countless other lives as well. True wealth isn't just material. Real fortune lies in how we choose to use what we're given, transforming even temptations into opportunities to do good. When we act with our hearts, we leave a mark that transcends time and space. If you enjoyed this story, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the notification bell so you don't miss the next videos. Let us know in the comments, would you have done the same in their place? Would you have had that courage? Share the video with your friends. See you next time.